And so most of you have heard of Amanda Feilding, and as one of the true leaders in this field. So we're very, very lucky to have her, and we're looking forward to hearing stories about how she got started and what motivates her and what projects she's worked on and will be working on in the future. We will definitely have some question and answers. I feel lucky to be the one having the initial conversation, but we would love to have questions from any of you. Ron Miss, who helped get Amanda connected with us, one of our board members, will be monitoring the chat, and will probably ask you to come on and ask the question in person. That just is a nicer way to have the question asked. Some of the questions may be similar, and so Ron may pull some of them together, but it's nice to have the questioner come on. So really my first question is what I alluded to, that you've been a leader in this field for so many years. So we'd love to hear some stories about how you got started, what convinced you that this was really a field you wanted to be involved with. And you've become such a leader, not taking a traditional research path. So how did you get here?
I suppose by chance and good fortune.
Mm-hmm.
I had a rather eccentric upbringing in an incredibly beautiful setting on the edge of a fen, in very isolated actually, because it's a house up a long track and with 3 moats. It was a medieval royal fortress and hunting lodge. And it has a very distant feel. Although you're only an hour from London, you feel as though you're back several centuries in the middle of nowhere. And it was isolated because my father was very eccentric, and he never had any money. So we lived in a wonderful house and beautiful things, but no heating or petrol or school uniforms, and everything was cut to the quick. And so I spent a lot of time wandering around, kind of dreaming of the future and what I'd do. And as a little girl, I had a kind of, obviously, I'm sure they all do, mystical experiences in this amazing setting, and dreams of heroism. And one of my dreams was watering the desert. I always thought going to the desert and watering was a very romantic thought. And then I had, my godfather was a Buddhist monk living in an island on Sri Lanka, and he translated the main Buddhist texts, like, what is it, Pathways to Perfection, and very seminal Buddhist texts, and was a very fascinating man. And I always longed to meet him. And then, anyway, at one point, I went to boarding school, which I didn't really love at all, and convent. But my parents longed for me not to be there and be at home, but I thought it would be kind of rather weak to give them up. Anyway, I won the science prize, and I asked for books on Buddhism. And the nuns said, no, I'm sorry, and wouldn't give me books on Buddhism, but on art. So I said, thanks very much, I'll go and educate myself. So I left school at 16, and with £25, partly because of the shortage of money at home, and partly because that was the rule in those days, you couldn't take more than £25 out of England. I set off to go to Ceylon. And I never got there, but I had all sorts of adventures on the way, and I lived with a sheikh, with the biggest tribe, reaching from Palmyra down to Aden, and all sorts of dervish dancers and sadhus. And anyway, I traveled quite extensively with no money. And at one point, I had no passport because I'd left where I was without my passport. I had no passport for months, traveling around. And that was very exciting. And when I got back to England, I somehow got as my tutor someone called Professor Zehner, who was the world's leading professor in the world, kind of the British Houston Smith kind of thing, but earlier, who'd written a book called Mysticism, Sacred and Profane. And he very sweetly took me up as his student. And so I studied comparative religions and mysticism with him, and also classical Arabic, actually, because anyway, one of my tutors, someone said they're terrified of Amanda losing her Catholicism, so tried to divert her from Buddhism. So he decided to teach me classical Arabic. But so that went on for quite a while. But the main thing was from about the age of 10, my passion was the mystical experience. And so I read all mystics, and because living here, I had a very strong imagination, and I had a close relationship with a kind of fantasy god. And then in the Catholic Church with the incense, I, had mystical experience. And so that was always a kind of strong imprint. And my father was kind of agnostic, atheist, and he was my kind of intellectual companion. And so I had both sides of the equation. And anyway, then I started I first was introduced to cannabis when I was at Oxford by an older group who had been, I think they were the last to be called up in the army. And so they'd been to wherever country they went in those days, and started smoking. So that was in 1960. And I thought it was amazing, as probably many, many people are listening to Ray Charles and just the magic of the music. And anyway, I fell in love with cannabis. And then it was several years later, 1965, that I was introduced to LSD. It had come from Holland, and it was newly in England. And I thought it was very amazing, and had the kind of initial wonderful mystical experience and all that. But then after a bit, I thought, it's slightly like going to the fun fair. It's not something one could live on. And that was kind of put it in a slightly different category of wonder. Then I had a very bad trauma with someone, actually the person who turned Leary on to LSD, of him, against my wishes, pouring thousands of LSD trips into my coffee when I said I didn't want it, because I had, and it was a psychic rape, basically, with the wrong intentions he did it. And that was very traumatic to me. And I retired to a hut down here at Beckley, my home, where my parents lived, in the woods, and kind of pulled myself together. And then some friend came and said, look, there's a party in London, you must come, and Ravi Shankar's playing, and, come. And so I went, and there I met, and this was the good fortune I always consider of my life in many ways. I met a Dutch scientist who arrived in England that day, called Bart Huggis. And he had two hypotheses. He was trained as a doctor, and he came from a long line of naturopath doctors. I think his father, grandfather, great-grandfather were all naturopath doctors. And he had two hypotheses. one was about the action of psychedelics, because he had been a subject in the university when he was studying, taking LSD. And his hypothesis was that there's a change in capillary volume, basically, that the action of psychedelics, LSD, is to constrict the veins, and that builds up a greater volume of blood in the brain in ratio to cerebral spinal fluid, which is squeezed out of the central nervous system and replaced by blood for as long as it takes for gravity to reclaim the blood. So you come down. And that was a very interesting hypothesis. And the other hypothesis he had, which was key to my new understanding, was that the ego is a mechanism that controls the distribution of blood in the brain. And basically, the upright talking ape had developed this much more than any other animal as a compensatory measure for the fall of our blood in the brain. So to direct the limited amount of blood, we build up this mechanism. We are not born with it. It comes over the first, maybe the second year with words. And we learn not to control what we do through the use of and recognition of words. And that to me was a very, very deep new understanding. And most importantly, with the first hypothesis, it meant that with more blood in the brain, you combust more glucose, so your sugar level falls. And this was particularly relevant to me because my father was a very bad diabetic. He came back from the war as a bad diabetic. And I, as the youngest in the family, was his beloved dog who went everywhere with him and kept, because he was constantly falling into comas or getting short of carbohydrates. So my function was to stop him falling in the ditch and being lost. And so I knew the sugar level very intimately from a very young age, because I started being his beloved dog when I was 3, and it was a role I very much liked. And so I knew sugar level. And so when Bart told me this, I obviously went by, because in a way, the last thing I wanted was LSD, having had this appalling experience. And I found I could control my consciousness and keep concentration and keep control, but at a higher level. And I found that an amazing breakthrough. And then you have the choice of leaving your sugar level to drop and getting more loss of that concentration, the ego direction, and in which mystical experiences and that sort of thing can happen, and hallucinations and all the kind of strange wonders which a psychedelic can bring on. And that to me was an amazing, made the psychedelics, and in my case it was LSD, an amazing tool to be able to enhance one's cognition and awareness and sense of wonder and all the things that psychedelics do, but at the same time enable one to keep control of that now much stronger horse one was riding. And so our passion was studying the human personality, how we work, physiology and personality, and what is psychedelic doing, and what is our history, and where do we come from. And so when I say we, I really mean Bart Hughes and his friend and disciple, Joe Mellon, and me, we worked as a threesome for many years, studying the human position. And during that time, we often really lived at the higher level because, and LSD was our compound. Actually, Bart made it himself in his friend's mother's kitchen in Amsterdam. And then she had thrown it away, not knowing what it was. They had to remake it all. And then he took that to Amsterdam, and that was the LSD which spread through Europe. But at this point, it was still legal. But then already it began to get prohibited, even as early as 97. And in fact, Bart was in the middle of the night, the very smart man from the Foreign Office came and said he had to leave England, which was an incredible inconvenience because we were doing wonderful work here. And so we went to Holland. But that is when I really, I started reading all the books, Freud, and Reich, and wonderful books on physiology and psychology and all of that. And that really became my passion and my mission. I suddenly realized it wasn't watering the human, it wasn't watering the desert, which was my passion, but it was watering the desert of the human brain. Because I, at that point, could see the enormous possibilities of using psychedelics creatively, not only to improve one's cognition, but also to overcome psychological problems. And one of them was I'd become a nicotine addict because I was very tall as a child and I didn't want to be so tall. So at 13, I started very not chain smoking, but quite heavily smoking cigarettes. And Bart said, what a disgusting habit it was. And so I decided, well, I'll give it up. I'll, take a trip of LSD and just give it up. And that's what I did. One trip with the firm intention to stop. I never smoked another cigarette. And so later that came in very useful when I suggested that study to Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins, and we started that overcoming addiction, nicotine addiction study. But let me see, and then so I gave up, I was painting before that, I gave up that and decided this is my life's work, to understand how psychedelics work, and in order to understand better how consciousness works and what makes us human animals different from other animals, what separates us. So the study of the ego was my great passion. And I read all the books of Freud on LSD, but that was with taking glucose, in whatever form. But then if I wanted to, at that point, I wanted to psychoanalyze myself and discover my problem, but I had no money and couldn't go to a therapist, so I didn't know what a therapist was actually. So I did it myself through reading Freud and other books. William Reich was another great favorite of mine. And so to read and understand and take notes and analyze the book, one kept one's sugar level normal, and then to get back into one's deeper self, one dropped one's sugar level. And so I found one could be both doctor and patient to a certain degree with this technique. And then in the evenings, to relax, we played thousands of games of Go, which is an amazing, I don't know if you know it, old Chinese game, it's the oldest game in the world, which is really kind of intuitive pattern recognition, which is the basis in a way of all creative activity. And to my surprise, I turned out in the group we were in to be a very good, at the level we were at, which is obviously amateur, because we didn't read anything, we just played. And but I became a relatively good player, and I used it actually to test the concept that it improves cognitive functioning to take LSD and keep your sugar level normal, so you can control the increased power the brain has on it by playing Go. And with Go, you have a handicap system, so you know your relative strengths compared with your opponent. And me and Joe's been played, Bart had been thrown out of England by this day, thousands of games, and wrote them all down and really minded about winning and losing. And he had a handicap of 3, usually. And then when I was on LSD and keeping my sugar level normal, I won kind of 9 games and his handicap went up to 6. And so for me, that was an indication that it can, in reality, improve cognitive functioning. And that was exciting in itself. I thought, my goodness me, not only can it help make one have a mystical experience, which brings all of that with it, but one can also improve one's cognition, and then one can also overcome trauma. So it's an amazingly, and what was utterly obvious about the psychedelics is that they enhance one's hearing and appreciation of beauty, and both auditory and visual. I mean, I got to a point where I didn't want to look at beautiful things, really beautiful things, unless I was on a higher level of consciousness, because I thought it was rather a kind of insult, like being in Egypt, or I traveled quite a lot, and when one was in a wonderful place like Egypt, one didn't want to lose the enhanced appreciation of the beauty. So in those days, we took it on a kind of fairly regular basis. And in those days, trips were big compared with now. The basic dose was 250 micrograms. But by taking it every day, you get much more accustomed to it. And so it's all still making you, changing the cognition, but you get used to it. And so it becomes more like a microdose. And that's what I discovered. I found a very, very satisfactory, because you had the feeling more vitality, more enjoyment, more humor, more love, more intellectual curiosity. And yet one was still in control and could manage, and one didn't look odd, and, like that. And then, of course, the whole prohibition wall came down, and this wonderful compound became the kind of domain of the wicked and devil kind of thing, which was a tragedy. And it was completely clear to me that it was a disaster for humanity, because used cleverly with knowledge, I realized right back in 66, 67, that the psychedelics were an amazing breakthrough. And they weren't new, they'd been around. I thought they, had probably had a very important role in humans becoming the dominant animal, and very important role in creating language and art and music and medicine and spirituality. And I thought it definitely played a role in all that. And it's very fascinating much later when I found out about the Chauvet caves to realize that right back then, in whatever it was, 35,000 years ago, when they were making that art, which has really never been surpassed, and they were obviously on a psychedelic to be able to do those lines right in the depths of the earth. So I realized that they were using them right back then. And the fact that they became prohibited, like the Christians were very bad, obviously, because although they were, I'm sure, using them to begin with in Jesus's time, obviously they later suppressed them and just were left with the word and left the experience behind. But so then what happened? I kind of realized that this was my life's pattern, to try to bring to humanity knowledge of how to use this category of compounds as tools to help us survive. And I felt totally dedicated to this mission. I think as a child, the Catholic part of my upbringing had always made me think, oh my goodness, I hope I don't get a vocation, have to start, become a nun and become a convent or something. And then I thought, well, I couldn't bear being a nun in a convent. I'll start my own religion kind of thing. And then when I met psychedelics, I thought, well, this is it. This is the core of what all mysticism is about, in a sense. So that was very fascinating. Mm. And so the next, whatever, 30 years, I mean, as I had no money, I had to earn a living, and I had children and all those wonderful things. But the basic center thread was a love of the psychedelics. And in psychedelics, I actually include cannabis, because I think it's acting in the same direction. And also it felt very related to the mystical state and to the changes brought about by meditation. But we approach it in a completely, you could say, professional way. I mean, Bart had written his thoughts about it on a scroll, which is, if you can find anything which would put the medical profession off, a scroll is a good idea. And so, sorry, I don't know if I've got lost. You better.
So, no.
Where,
so where we are right now, Amanda, it's all been stopped. So then, and amazing, your passion. So you kept your passion alive.
Yes.
And I suspect that's when you started the Beckley Foundation. Maybe you could tell us about that and its role in moving ahead this research, because it's been so crucial.
Well, the gap between when I discovered about it and started passionately the first 3-4 years thinking about it and studying human physiology and psychology and all of that, using it at that time. And then I tried to find doctors, scientists, journalists who were interested in the subject and would like to work with me in trying to discover how it works and what are the changes in the brain that is bringing it about to give these fantastic different states of consciousness. But strangely, I found very, very sympathetic doctors and scientists, but they at the end said, you know, they've got a very good job and they actually didn't want to lose it, and or God, you know, if he intended us to be at that state of consciousness, would. Because also by that stage, I'd become very interested also in trepanation, which is another ancient practice to raise the floor a little bit. And in the ancient world, it was the kind of shaman and the royalty who first were using trepanation, which you could see from the fact that the skulls were especially buried. And so funny enough, that was a thing one could talk about because no one had ever thought of making that illegal. And so I put my artwork in a way into talking that. And for I had been a painter, and then I became a more conceptual artist, and I stood for Parliament twice actually on the platform of trepanation for the national health, always relating it to different levels of consciousness and how humanity would gain from being able to more knowledgeably make use of the different levels. And the good thing is that art, no one took seriously other than making money out of it. So you could express anything in art. So I did artworks, and I had a exhibition at places like is it the CIA and PS1 in New York, and I got a campaign going with the kind of lot of important people like Andy Warhol and the British ambassador, and all signing that we should be allowed to research trepanation. I wasn't asking for them more than that. And so anyway, this went on for maybe 30 years, from 66. And then I realized, as a female without letters after my name, with no money to speak of, I wasn't getting far. It wasn't breaking through. And so then I thought, well, as an artwork, I'll become a foundation. And so first I started a foundation called the Foundation to Further Consciousness. And then after a year or two, I realized that name would come to whatever. It wasn't good. So I changed it to the Beckley Foundation, which is the name of my house, because that sounds slightly like Berkeley or Bletchington, or it sounds slightly more serious and academic. And I was very lucky I thought, I want to play it completely, get to the top and influence down rather than more than influencing up. So I decided to get the best scientists I could find were willing to back me to join my advisory board. And so I started with Albert Hoffman, who said very sweetly he would, and then Sasha, who's a great friend.
Shulgin, yeah.
Shulgin, yeah, he would. But that wasn't really the people I needed. I needed the establishment people. And I had been working for a couple of years because I was organizing a seminar at Windsor Castle to focus on drug policy. That was in 96, I think, 1996. And then I think it was Prince Harry was arrested, or not arrested, but caught smoking cannabis or something. And the royal family panicked, and I'd spent a year and a half, 2 years setting up this thing, and it was all cancelled. And so that's when I changed the name to Beckley, got these top, oh yes, it was a scientist I had dinner with called, now he's Sir Colin Blakemore. He was the top neuroscientist in England at that point. And he was a very, very nice and open-minded man, scientist, and very interested in what I said. And he said, oh, well, if you can't do it at Windsor Castle, come and do it at Magdalen, where he is, Oxford, where he was kind of top scientist. And when he signed, then I got a lot of other very top scientists signing. So I got whatever it was, 10, 15 of the top scientists. And that gave me a certain standing. And then I thought, well, the best thing is to give these seminars in a place which people respect. So I thought, well, maybe the best place is the House of Lords. And so I started a series of seminars called Society and Drugs, a rational perspective, I think it was. And anyway, I did these with, I asked top experts, the top scientists, the Home Secretary, the whatever. I probably asked the Prime Minister, and I asked some presidents, and I got the head of NIDA, that charming man called Charles Schuster, who shocked the Americans by saying that he actually took and loved psychedelics because they improved his, whatever he played, the clarinet or whatever instrument he played, and it had been a very positive effect on his life, which was very sweet of him to say, because we had Chatham House rules, so one didn't talk about what was said outside. And so these seminars became very, very influential, because what I was saying is that cannabis and the psychedelics are different to other drugs, and we should base our drug policies on scientific evidence base, which you'd think would be obvious, but no one then had started doing that, instead of political expediency. And so that was back in whatever, 2002 or whatever. And I did a lot of work there. I didn't want to do drug policy, and it was nothing I had any relationship to that area of life. But I realized one had to reform drug policy globally in order to be able to do the research, because it was so restricted, the research. I mean, I remember suggesting a talk to Colin Blakemore. I said we should do a scale of harms and benefits, basically benefits and harms, I said. And he said, Amanda, you know, that's stupid. One will never be allowed to do on the benefits of psychedelics. Anyway, there's no science being done on them to show any benefits, and no science will be done at the moment on them. So we should just do a scale of harms, which is actually what we did in, I think it was 2003 or 4. And then later, Dave Nutt, who was also on my advisory board, as was Schuling, Dave Nichols. I had a lovely board of people on. And so it became a very famous study later with Dave's influence on it, the scale of harms, which showed that psilocybin and LSD was right at the bottom of the scale of harms. And then I also did a book, the first book to have a global view on cannabis, and it was called, I got the best drug policy experts in the world, Peter Reuter, Robin Room, to co-write it. And I was there at the meetings and kind of, not directing it at all, but what do you call it, more getting it together. And that was a very important book. And I presented at the UN, and the charming drug policy man, very nice Indian, who's head of drug policy, said, actually, Amanda, this book makes me realize that we'll have to regulate cannabis. And I said, well, then what about psychedelics too? And he said, well, privately, I agree, but publicly, it's too far at the moment. That was a long time ago. So, but the main point why I started the Beckley Foundation was to enable me to do the research I wanted to do. And when in the 90s, brain imaging started to evolve, develop, I realized that brain imaging was an amazing tool to study how the psychedelics work in the brain, and indeed to learn much more about consciousness itself, which was always my passion. So, and I couldn't possibly do that as a private individual, but as the director of a foundation, I could, by finding scientists who might be interested in the field and would collaborate with me on building up the research. So the first scientist I approached in 1998 was Franz Wollenweider at Zurich. And my passion was what I had learned originally about the possible changing irrigation of the brain, the increase of the blood supply to the brain cells, producing more simultaneous combustion, and therefore an expansion of awareness. And so that what I went and suggested to Franz that we work together on, and to look and see if capillary volume increases and cerebral spinal fluid volume decreases under the effect of LSD or another psychedelic. And in that study, we were using PET, he was using PET. And he rang me and said, you're going to be delighted. I went over there several times, and then he said, the results you're going to be absolutely delighted with. But strangely, they were never published. Mm. So that was frustrating. And then I started looking for other collaborators. And one of the people on my advisory board was Professor Dave Nutt. And I asked him if we suggested to him that we did psychedelic research together. And he's always game for any good idea. And so we decided to work together investigating psychedelics, which he didn't actually know. Obviously he knew of, but he didn't know the experience at all. And so we set up the Beckley Imperial. At that point, he was at Bristol, Beckley Bristol research program, psychedelic research program. And then when he went to Imperial in 2007, I think it was, we became the Beckley Imperial Psychedelic Research Program with Dave and me as researchers. And then, funny enough, a young student scientist had come to me and asked if I had any ideas what he should do for his PhD. And he mentioned that he liked, he was interested in LSD, and he liked Freud, two of my favorite subjects. So I said to him, well, I'll ring up Dave and see if he'll take you on, and which he did. And so when we started the Beckley Foundation, and then started the Beckley Imperial Research Program, we employed him as our principal investigator. So that started a very successful collaboration between the three of us. And our first study was with psilocybin, which we published, I think, in 2012, where we used, I was determined to use brain imaging and look at the changes in cerebral circulation. That was my main passion. And Dave's speciality, very much the different serotonin, different ways of influencing consciousness. And so the first study was very interesting because we picked up a reduction in the blood supply to the default mode network. Mm-hmm. And which you all know is a kind of modern neuroscientific word for what used to be called the ego, or at least parts of what we used to call the ego. The controlling, repressive control part of the whole mechanism, which completely aligned with what we had been talking about in the 60s as the ego being a controlling network, a conditioned reflex controlling network, conditioned on the meaning of the word to repress arteries in order to send the blood to the parts of the brain which were most essential for survival, meaning that whole areas of the brain were like deserts. But the functioning part kept the blood. And what had already been picked up by another scientist was that when he fell upon the default mode network, was that it's highly active. And when kind of external activity is turned off, this area takes a great deal of the blood supply, and that it's particularly overactive underlying conditions like depression and addiction and these psychologically unbalanced behaviors have a particularly high activity in the default mode network. So then the next step was to think, well, maybe if one, as we know that the psychedelic reduces the activity of the default mode network and expands while it reduces the activity, at the same time, the correlation to that is an immense, dramatic increased connectivity and increasing of activity in the rest of the brain. So that is the kind of condition underlying the unified experience of the mystical experience. Mm-hmm. So we thought, well, maybe a psychedelic could help in underlying, taking the carpet from the feet of the problem, i.e. the addiction or the depression. And so we did the study with looking at its effect on depression, which actually the Medical Research Council gave us a grant for, surprisingly, and had very positive results from the research, which showed, I think it was out of people, they were treatment resistant participants, who, that means that they had had at least 2 treatments which had failed, I think it is. And then there was 67% were then reduced to the beneath the chronic depression level, which was an amazingly successful result. And so then later we did another study following that up. Anyway, that study was very key in giving people confidence to see that psychedelics were an amazing tool to treat psychologically based illnesses, which covers a lot of the modern problems of humanity: depression, addiction, post-traumatic stress disorder, and existential suffering. Immense areas of human mental problems. And I think in a way that was the kind of beginning of the realization that these compounds could be valuable to humanity. And then at the same time, I was a great admirer of Roland Griffiths and the work he was doing, and sadly didn't have any money to get involved in the first one with the mystical experience, which I particularly loved. And he said, well, when you've got some money, come with me and we'll think what might be a good idea to do. And funny enough, I found the email the other day, and it was, I think I had $5,000 or something to say, what shall we do? And then I said, well, I gave up nicotine on LSD because the man I was in love with thought it was a disgusting habit. So I took LSD and decided to stop, and I stopped. And so that was the birth of our nicotine study, which we did very slowly because it was being done by Matt O'Reilly, in his spare time. And so the first 15 people took a long time, but the results were surprisingly good, with I think something like 80% giving up nicotine for quite a substantial time period. And let me just think, where should I go from here?
So I would just say, Amanda, thank you so much. This has been wonderful to be on your journey to get to where we are, and we wouldn't be here without you, for sure. I mean, that's really, really clear. So it's really beautiful to hear that story. Thank you. And my question, we don't have a lot more time.
Oh,
So, we have 10, 15 minutes maybe.
Oh.
So, because we had to live your very full life with you. So thank you.
That's very boring. I must stop talking about the past.
No. So, well, actually, my question now is, I know that one of your main interests is end of life and the betterment of people's end of life. If you could just speak to that, please.
Yes, I'm horrified by how appallingly, as I'm sure is most of the world, how appallingly we die. And it's very uncivilized and horrific. And so I've been doing a lot of research in these last years on microdosing, and particularly my favorite compound is actually LSD, because I think it's the purest and the least toxic. It's not toxic. You can't kill an animal on LSD. I mean, my 40, whatever it was, 4,000 trips didn't kill me. It shook me badly, but it didn't kill me. And so I think it's a wonderful compound, and it's only taboo because it was made so by the wrong reasons, for political reasons and whatever. It was just made taboo. And it's a terrible mistake. And actually, I promised Albert Hoffman, don't worry, Albert, I'll get it, into the fabric of society by the time you're 100. But I didn't do that. But I still kept the intention. And so I've been researching that, and we did the first LSD study at the Berkeley Imperial study, which showed that wonderful picture of the ordinary brain and the brain on LSD, which is full of connectivity. The whole brain is connected, which again endorsed what my feelings were in the 60s. And so I'm a great admirer and a lover of the study, John Hopkins and others' study of the end of life. I think it's one of the most meaningful and valuable studies, and I wanted to do it. And anyway, that's another story we'll take up, but it's not an indication, amazingly. Dying is not an indication, typical of the madness of humanity. So then I've been doing a translational study. One of my wonderful collaborations is with a team of Brazilian scientists. And we did a translational study using LSD and with mini brains and animals and humans. And we found out at each stage, we found out the increased neuroplasticity, the increased neurogenesis, the anti-inflammatory qualities. And then we did in the rat study, young rats explore new toys. They prefer new toys to old toys. Old rats don't, adult rats. So we gave an adult rat LSD and we found it explored new toys. But that goes on getting more fascinating, but I haven't got time to tell you about it. So then we also did a study at the Beckley Maastricht study because on LSD microdosing and to see safety and efficacy. We did a study looking at with placebo 5, 10, and 20. And at 20 mics, we were looking particularly for cognitive enhancement, attention, mood enhancement, and pain, any management. And the strange thing is, at 20 mics, we saw a notable increase in those three measures, i.e. Cognitive attention, mood, and pain management. And obviously I thought, well, those are absolutely ideal for old age. And we also did an experiment with rats, old rats, giving them LSD, and then we discovered one had to give them an enhanced environment too, i.e. in humans, it would be giving them lessons as well as LSD. So now I'm just putting into motion, hopefully, a study investigating that in humans. And I was involved in an observational study with, not a study, just observational. It happened with a very wonderful old lady of 97 who had Alzheimer's and dementia. But maybe I'll give her a fraction of a microdose. And the change it brought about was just remarkable, unbelievable. Suddenly there she was, sparkling away, saying how wonderful she felt, and she'd love to read some poetry. And you can see in the photograph her bright eyes shining with pleasure and laughter, as opposed to this frightened, sad animal, trapped animal. And so that made me think, my goodness me, we must make use of this and get it out there to the suffering senior, old people. And so in the last year, I've been very much looking at that and actually making a lot of progress with it, setting up studies in Switzerland and in Jamaica with natural psilocybin, because there, I used to advise the government there, and I said they should make Jamaica the island of well-being, and it will bring back the wealth of the banana business. And so I got a wonderful scientist, doctor I work with there, and at the moment we're setting up this study with psilocybin. And then I'm immensely honored and happy to be talking about a study with sunstone to see if LSD, the depth it brings, the extra depth. I think it will be finally realized that it's the best of the compounds because it's the least toxic, and also you can have, therefore, bigger doses without damaging the person in any way, which can get deeper and help change the setting which is obviously, I'm a great believer in, it's not the compound alone, it's the compound and the set and setting. And in that, the therapy and is a vital ingredient. So I'm visualizing now a care home where we can, with knowledge and medical supervision, give microdoses where appropriate to people who would want them and appreciate from them. And one will give a whole new form of care, which would be loving care with the person, involving them. I see it as a kind of doula, a new type of doula for dying, whereby the availability, and I always say, keep it as low as possible, the dose. You want as low a dose as brings about the return of vitality. And certain people who've had this, their families have said their parent was given back to them. They'd lost their parent. And it was the vitality of that person, the love, the joy of the person came back. And I feel in this new type of clinic, one would encourage all sorts of, I'm sure like they do to a certain degree at Sunstone, teaching meditation, because I think psychedelics and meditation are a perfect synergy. And that's another study I want to do, studying the mystical experience and the use of psychedelics to see how they can complement each other. And that and other forms of approaching death. And also have children in, music in, all the other things. And as the old people get more vital, probably the school children would love to come in and spend an afternoon on our
Beautiful.
yoga. And so that's a new passion of mine at the moment. And I'm very excited to talk to you about it, because obviously you know much more about it, because I've never had therapy, and so far I'm not suffering from Alzheimer's, although you never know. And I think that could make a lot of happiness in the world. I mean, actually, why I love psychedelics is because they're completely unspecific in where their benefits are. They can cure mental illness. I'm also doing wonderful research using psychedelics to treat Parkinson's and now Alzheimer's. I mean, it's unbelievable. And then, of course, for healthy people, it can enhance all the different things we like enhancing. And as we've shown, nature, love of nature increases, love of other people, conflict, everything. There's so many different areas the psychedelics can improve us as a species. And one of them, obviously, is adaptability. And in order for us to survive, we have to be adaptable. We have to be able to learn. And an important point I'd like to say is in my LSD research, we've shown that LSD in microdose, particularly say 20 micrograms, I studied large microdose, it increases the factor of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which shows an increase in learning ability, and also a shortage of it underlies depression, diabetes, all sorts of conditions. So if we can increase the BDNF and other factors which psychedelics can change, I mean, like ibogaine works on the dopamine system. So the more we start learning about how these different compounds work on different things, and then have the freedom to combine them and play with them in clinics, and try to personalize medicine so it's suited to the person. It's not a kind of doctrine of what one does. I think all of that's very exciting. I think the future is very, very exciting.
Yes.
And I think we're now at the kind of foothills, obviously, of the future. But in the last 2 years, the knowledge of the potential benefits has spread to a wider level. And I have to say, in the late 60s, early 70s, I said the only way to get through this taboo is with the very best science to demonstrate its potential to improve humanity's condition. And I feel that has now started to get through, and slowly the fabric of society will change. And I've never thought psychedelics are for everyone at all. But I think they should be respected within our social code. And it's slightly like being a shaman or something. It won't be everyone, it will be some people who use them, but it will be to society's benefit, in my opinion. So it should be encouraged, not repressed. And I think maybe we're getting near to that.
Yes.
Point.
And I would say with huge gratitude to you for getting us to this point. So,
well, not many, but I suppose I've been one of the foot soldiers, you know.
one of the leaders, I would say.
Well, very nice,
So,
thank you.
yeah, so huge gratitude too for sharing the way you have. We are getting to the end of our time, and I want to respect your time, particularly since you're a few hours later than we are.
All right, but I want to respect yours, and I'm afraid I was much too long-winded at the beginning.
No,
I haven't had time to prepare.
The chat is full of people saying how amazing this has been and how wonderful it's been to listen to you. So thank you, Amanda.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
I also would like to ask Ron if he has anything more to add, or
yes, well, do we have time for any questions, or are we up against the limit here?
I think if people want to leave, they can leave. It's up to Amanda how late she can stay up.
You know, we know you were at a wedding. I'm not sure if you're a little tired over there, but if you have the time, Amanda. Well, I'll ask people if they would like to type any questions they'd like to ask Amanda into the chat box. And with the time that we have, I'll call on you to ask the question to Amanda. While people think about that, Marcina has written one thing about drug policy. And Marcina, if you'd like to ask your question to Amanda, that will kick things off.
Sure. Hi, Amanda.
Hi there. Hello.
Hi. So I do want to know, you're talking about the drug policy that you were presenting.
Yeah.
And I mean, because we're obviously really looking at the best kind of policies that we can pass here, and would love to see what you would present, and if you have the ability to share the one that you were going to present too.
Well, I would decriminalize the use of all drugs. I would reschedule, particularly cannabis and the psychedelics. So, because the scheduling is scientifically inaccurate. They do have medical qualities, and they are not addictive. So they're not by nature deeply dangerous. And if we rescheduled even slightly from, I don't know if American schedules are exactly the same as England, but it doesn't need the UN to do that. A country can, not even the Prime Minister, if someone, Home Secretary or something, can reschedule. And then immediately it cuts the cost of research. I mean, the cost of psychedelic research is ridiculous because it's so highly scheduled and no one's got the compounds, and the compound can cost thousands of pounds in a ridiculous way. Psychedelic compounds should be pure, GMP, and affordable for anyone in the world, rich or poor. So that's one of my aims, is to make that. But I think rescheduling based on reality, and this is what I was saying at the UN places in whatever, 2000, right back then, they need to reschedule according to the scientific evidence. And then they'll definitely come down, then we can do much more easily the research. We can make the compounds, make them cheaper, make it universal. So that would be my advice. First advice, I mean, there's all sorts of advice one could give, but I think the recognition of the great beneficial potential of both cannabis and psychedelics, and that's what I was always trying to say when I started the policy. These compounds are different from other compounds because they do not cause crime or illness or addiction, and they can be incredibly useful to mankind or humanity more generally. So I think they could open up. We're in a mental health epidemic, as we all know, and with COVID, it's gone right up. And we need to kind of help reverse that by making, I've done research where people have overcome treatment-resistant depression in the study, and then poor people come tragically saying, how can I help them get access to these things? So I think widening the access is important. That's why Oregon is so wonderful. And Marcin, I know about you starting a clinic, and we're starting a clinic in Barcelona where the regulation is better. And I want to start a clinic in Jamaica where I think one is doing the research, and two is the next step, which we are now at, is getting the access so people can get these treatments. I mean, it's criminal that people can't get these treatments when there's scientific evidence showing how beneficial they can be. So we need to treat and teach many, many more doctors, therapists. We need to open this up to humanity, basically. So that's what I think.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. There's all kinds of people complimenting you on your work and thanking you for taking the time to share, this talk with us. I will, since I don't see any of the questions here, if I may, I'm going to ask a question, but it's really not to Amanda. It's kind of for Amanda to the group, because Amanda mentioned a study. I mean, she's mentioned many that she's already done and kind of a wish list of others she would like to do, including one that she referenced was Sunstone Therapies that I'm a part of. And for those who don't know Sunstone, we focus on bringing psychedelic therapy to cancer patients to help them with their emotional distress and end of life condition. And Amanda mentioned a study that we're trying to design with her, and funding is always the issue. So if any of you have experience in grant writing or can think of foundations that might be particularly interested in supporting that research, I'll type my email address into the box here. And I would love to speak with you, because that's really what we need to do to make that study happen. And I'd welcome any suggestions.
And I have to say that the funding is the biggest problem. I mean, I'm a non-profit charity, and I've survived the last 20 odd years on almost no money. And now at my ripe old age, I've got 40 studies all planned, some of them going, some ready, some, and I just want to move forward. And, government money, I don't know how, but one relies on philanthropy, or one goes into the investment arena, which is another very valuable arena. And of course, it's so expensive, we're going to have to function in that area. But exploratory philanthropy, exploratory research, which is done, funded philanthropically, has an advantage of leaving one freer to go what one really thinks is the best for humanity, not for what will produce returns. And so I think it's incredibly valuable that we keep it. And you in America are so much better than we are. England doesn't go in for philanthropy, so it's particularly difficult. And Americans don't really like, I don't think, funding across water. So it's a difficult predicament, but there's some wonderful philanthropists in America, and I should get better. I'm very bad at raising money. I need to go and take lessons from Rick. and my old friend. So, you know, but it is a very valuable, and that's one of the points of rescheduling it, because that artificially makes it so much more expensive, because it takes so much longer to do it. The compounds can get so much more expensive because there's no market for them. So all that work has to go on just a tiny little quantity for research. So we need to conquer that in order to get it not only to the rich countries of the world, but also to the poor. And we need to get it out there. And so we need to do the research, change the policy, make the compounds, and spread the knowledge, and then just get it interwoven so it's part of culture, the use of psychedelics. Like our wise ancestors from 35,000 years ago. Let's try to catch up with them.
Rather than going backwards.
Thank you. Yeah, so we don't have any other questions, but again, I'll just say thank you again. Everyone is so complimentary of getting the chance to hear from you, Amanda. Thank you again.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I hope we'll meet again.
Yes, we look forward to having you on this side of the ocean for sure.
Absolutely.
And I'm so honored to be working with Sunstone and Bill Richards, who I've known and loved for many, many years.
We do have one more question, and as I said, people can leave if they don't want to stay, but I'd love to call on Benoit and see if he will come on and ask his question. I think it's a really important one, and I know one that Amanda's thought about.
Sorry, Benoit, I didn't see that in the list of all the compliments to Amanda.
That's all right. Yeah, thank you. I'm just happy to have spent this time with you, Amanda. It's really wonderful. Just as someone who has followed some of your work, you know, in my short time, I'm just so inspired by you and by your story. And I think I speak for everyone in saying just how grateful we are for your curiosity that has moved, you know, this entire field forward for many decades. So thank you very much. I'm very curious, seeing as how you've really been, you know, a part of psychedelic research from the earliest, you know, modern research, what your perspective is on the current kind of like exponential financialization that has been happening, almost in a very speculative way. And maybe you answered some of this already, but I'm curious, related or unrelated to that, if you have any concerns about how psychedelics are going to be able to fit ethically into, you know, into the paradigm of our modern society.
I think we need investment from private sector, from the business sector, because it's so extraordinarily expensive scientific research, bringing it to phase 3. But I don't like it if it protects. I believe in putting the good of society before maximum profit. And I think we should certainly make these compounds available to the poorer countries of the world and the poorest in the poorer countries. Like in Jamaica, we're going to be working with the poorest people there who have terminal cancer. And I think it's essential to have the compounds. I mean, actually at the moment I'm a founding partner of a company which is making psilocybin, natural psilocybin, you know, agricultural psilocybin in bioreactor vats, which will make it vastly cheap. And so then one can send a bioreactor vat of any size to any country, and they can make their own psilocybin easily. You know, I think making it cheap is essential. And as to the benefits and the threat of big business getting involved, I think there are definitely the advantages of producing more money to do more research, and that's a vastly important advantage. And I think the thing is, can one can people take up a ethical form of capitalism? And I think psychedelics could be the kind of birth of a more ethical form of capitalism, where the aim isn't maximum profit. It's, you know, profit is healthy and good, but also keep in mind the values of benefit for society. And that means that everyone should have access, in my view. I don't know if I've answered your question at all.
Yes, yes, you did. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes. And it's a beautiful answer. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
I wish there were more Amandas in this world.
I don't think no one would wish that. But thank you for your lovely, thank you very much. It's been lovely being
Yes.
with you.
No, it's been a wonderful afternoon, Amanda. Thank you. Thank
so
you.
much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow.
Wow. Wow is right. What a treat. So thank you everyone for being with us. Thank you, Ron, for helping connect us with Amanda. I think we all just were really part of history today, hearing her story like that.
Yes.
And so I feel very lucky, and feel very lucky to have all of you along with us. So thanks to each and every one of you for all you're doing to help move this work ahead.
What's next, love?
We're done.
No, but in terms of next sessions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think my mind has been blown by Amanda. There'll be nothing after Amanda. No, I'm sorry. November 7th, we have Peter Hendricks, who's coming. He's doing really important research down at the University of Alabama in Birmingham on addiction. And I think it's important we highlight his work. And then in the end of January, I think it's the 30th, we have Francois Borzat, who's going to come and talk about the work she's doing with consciousness medicine. So there'll be more about that. And if anyone has ideas of people they'd like to have us invite for future meetings, we're certainly open to those. And I'm seeing Tyler asking if there's a meeting in October. There isn't. We meet every other month. Some of the affinity groups have organized meetings on the off months, and I'm certainly open to that if people want to do that. But our core mission right now, or our core business, is to do the meetings every other month. So thanks to those of you who haven't been here before, and thanks to those of you who are such loyal BPRGers. We look forward to more time together in the future.
Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Shippen. Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Yep.
Oh,
Ciao.
Thank you, everyone.
I know. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
You're all amazing.
Thanks.
Bye, Jenny.
Thanks so much, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Mhm.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, Sherry.
Thanks so much, Sherry. That was fantastic.
Thank you, Sherry. It was great.
Bye, Bob. Say it again.
Bye-bye.